I'm Troy. On today's episode, we have on Tim Sheridan. Tim has written several animated films and TV shows, such as Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy and The Long Halloween. We dive into Tim's latest comic, Alan Scott Green Lantern, and how Tim fills in different layers for this Golden Age character. Listen in, and bada boom!
Hey Tim, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Doing
We're
good.
talking the day after the release of Green Lantern, Alan Scott. What's it feel
Yeah.
like to finally be able to get reaction?
It's it's
Yeah.
unreal. It's also for some people this is the day of release that we're talking because a lot of people don't get their comics until Wednesday. We, obviously hashtag DC Tuesday, put those books out a day early. But I got a lot of messages from people going, I went to my store and I couldn't get them, because they were closed. No, I gotta say, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. You're getting me at my absolute worst. And this is always my absolute worst time, which is when I'm in the middle of multiple books and I am behind, just had New York Comic Con. I'm behind on deadlines, which I never usually am. And also I'm promoting a book that's out right now, like today. So and so I'm constantly having to like retweet things or talk about stuff, or reviews are coming out, so I'm kind of trying to pull attention to those. And so this is like my absolute most frazzled. I can't believe I've even put myself together in a way that I look like a human being for you. That's because I care. So about the reaction, I was really nervous, to be honest. And I think I always am. I mean, I've done movies and TV stuff, and I've done other comics, and I don't think that I don't know if it's ever going to go away. I'm also one of those writers who is plagued by self-doubt. Like I get so close to a project and I'm working on it for so long that by the time it's released, I have no idea. I have no concept of whether it's even any good in any way or not. Like, I just don't know. I can't really look at it's something when when you stare at a word too long and suddenly you're like, wait a minute, that's not how you spell was, is it? W-A-S? That looks so wrong. That's how like comics look to me right before they're coming out. So it's different with like movies and TV because so many other people are involved in the process after I am. So I'll write the thing and then it goes off into the world and has, 100 other parents. And then it becomes something that is a version of what I envisioned and wrote a blueprint for. And it's amazing when it matches what was in your brain and you weren't even there through the process when they animated it or made it. But comics are different. Like I'm there every step of the process through the whole thing. So there aren't any surprises by the end. It's just staring at the was and wondering if it's spelled right.
Yeah, that's awesome. We had on Brian Edward Hill, who also has a background in film and TV. And I think something he brought up that was interesting is the fact that a lot of times, especially in screenwriting, TV, and film, there's a lot of things you write and you don't ever see or you don't have too much control over. So is that something that appeals to you about comics, where you're able to kind of, most of the things that you're kind of commissioned, a lot of times you get to see the outcome and get to engage in the audience a little bit more sometimes?
It's a great question. And it's a thing that, I came to comics after movies and TV. I mean, I was a comic book fan growing up, a huge DC fan growing up. And then I was working around near DC Comics in animation when my career started. And but I'm not for DC Comics. I was working for Warner Animation, which is a different company, which licenses basically the characters from DC, even though they're all under the Warner Brothers umbrella.
Which is never easy to explain to
mess.
anyone.
I know it's strange, but there is a good it's a close relationship. It's a good relationship. And when I was working there, Mike Carlin was our contact and oversaw animation from the DC side. So that meant everything I sent, any script any of us delivered, would go through Mike Carlin's eyes, and he would give notes from DC's point of view on what we were doing. And I tell you, I adapted The Long Halloween for animation, and which was a terrifying prospect. I was blown away by how, like, I'd send in outlines and scripts, and Mike Carlin would be like, I don't have any notes. Like, keep going. You're doing great. I was just like, no, like, I need you to give feedback. Like, I don't know what's happening. Although I will say that one was a weird special project where I never had before that, and I never have since felt as equipped and as comfortable throughout the process of adapting or writing something as I did doing that Long Halloween adaptation, which makes no sense, because it should be the absolute hardest thing that I ever had to do. But there was something about the team and the support they gave me from Carlin and from Butch Lukic and Jim Krieg and all the other people there, that I just felt like I have this. I've got this. I know what we want to do in a way that's going to celebrate the book and get people to open it up and crack that book open again, or go pick it up, if they've never picked it up. And that was my goal from the beginning, and make it a little bit different, just enough that it feels like it's in a different part of the multiverse than the book, so you're getting, it's not meant to replace it. It's just a different version of it, So it is, the process of being involved all the way through with the comics, it was very appealing in the beginning for me. I was like, oh, good, this is what I want, right? And then I got into it, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. Like, it feels like, because I've moved on and I'm writing the next issue, or I'm writing a different book entirely, and then pages are coming in, and I'm giving notes on the art, or they're coming, and I'm doing a pass to rewrite the script for the letterer based on how the panels sort of look now after the artist has had his way with them. And because sometimes things shift and change, and I want to make sure that, like in the instance of Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, that Lucas Gattoni has a script from me that makes sense, that he's not having to sit there and go, wait, this says panel 5, but there's only 4 panels on this page, So you go through and you kind of do all that stuff, and it just sort of becomes it's just, you're constantly working on the thing as it's shaping, but up and becoming what it's going to be. So do I like it? Yes. I still feel more comfortable in TV though than in comics. And it's a funny thing. I guess it's just because it's where I started, but that's what editors are for in comics. And they're the keepers of the flame, and they're able to sort of keep things moving. And even when when I have no idea what's going on, hopefully they do, and can keep it all going. But look at me. Like, I work on Superman and Batman and He-Man and Transformers, and like, these are the things that have meant the most to me, at least in terms of entertainment, my entire life. And I get to have fun and keep playing with those toys, which is so any sort of ill feelings that I have about the process or anything like that, it's like all that stuff rolls away pretty quickly when you do a gut check and realize that you are living through your dream job.
Totally.
Yeah.
I totally forgot for a split second until you said Transformers. I was like, oh yeah, you did write the War for Cybertron, which, since you brought up, like, hands down, one of my top favorite, like, Transformer, like, series. Like, I can't recommend it enough to people, and they're like, wait, there's a Transformers series on Netflix and it's animated. I'm like, yeah, go watch it. It's amazing. But
I thank you for saying that. Thank you. Like, it's funny. You must have watched it on 1.25 speed though, on like your computer, right? Because a lot of people tell me they had a completely different experience watching it on the TV versus when they put it on like 1.25 speed, because it's a lot like Long Halloween. Actually, it's a very slow burn, that show, and there's a lot of the moments that happen, that there are rich moments, acting moments that are happening, but it's not what you're accustomed to. I think with Transformers, you're accustomed to a different pace and a different rhythm. So I think a lot of people reacted negatively to that show when it was on because of that, and they didn't quite know how to phrase it. So you'll see comments from people where they'll say, I didn't like the dialogue, and of course a writer hears that and you're like, oh my God, I thought the dialogue was good, but what they mean, I came to learn, is they didn't like the dialogue recording. They didn't like the way that they don't like how it plays out in terms of spacing and pacing of the actual voices and the dialogue. So I'm such a Transformers kid. You can see some of them behind me right there. I got a much bigger collection than that. But I came in on season 2. So I was on Earthrise and Kingdom. I didn't do the first season of War for Cybertron. But that was great. I got that job. I left Warner Brothers on a Friday. I had just finished writing Superman Man of Tomorrow, and which was originally going to come after The Long Halloween, parts 1 and 2, but we had to move it up in production order because there was some question about what was going on with Matt Reeves' the Batman movie, and who could release when and stuff like that. And so they moved Man of Tomorrow up earlier. But anyway, it was the third movie that I wrote in that cycle after Long Halloween 1 and 2. And so I finished my job on Friday, and I was like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I got a call to start on Transformers on Monday. And I was like, Transformers, which is like what I wanted to do my whole life. And then the fact that the show is so G1 based, it's such a love letter to the original stuff that I grew up on, that it was the perfect atmosphere for me to get to work with those characters. So I had a great time. And then season 3 came along, Kingdom, and I didn't grow up with Beast Wars, and so we brought the Beast Wars and the G1 characters together in a story that makes a lot of sense if you know the lore. And but thankfully they hired an amazing writer named May Catt, who we become great friends, but we met walking in to our first day together working on Kingdom, and we became fast friends and colleagues, and we had a great time working. And thank goodness that May was there, because May is a Beast Wars fanatic and knows everything about Beast Wars, and was able to school me, and I was able to school May on G1 stuff. So it was great, a great time. Oh my God, we talked so much about Transformers.
No, it's okay. I could talk about Transformers all day. Like, I grew up watching Beast Wars, and Transformers, like when that series came on, I was like, man, this hasn't really been touched in a long time, and it's great to see some new life brought into it, especially in seasons 2 and 3. And with Alan Scott, it's just coming out and everything, and it's the first kind of Alan Scott comic I remember seeing in such a long time. So being as like you have such like a love for film, is there a story of Alan Scott's or of another Green Lantern that you might want to bring to film in the future?
Okay, so first of all, what a segue. Like, that was masterful. I am blown away by the skills. That was really cool. I'm sorry to call it out, but it was actually really good. I'm like, how are we going to get out of Transformers? But we did. Wait, we didn't get out of Transformers, because I'm just going to say that Daniel Warren Johnson book, I'm so excited. I read issue 1. I'm so excited, and I'm totally on board for that book. I can't wait. The art is amazing,
especially for a G1 fan.
Exactly. I mean, that's what it's like. It's catnip for me. So I'm really into it. Check it out. I'm here selling other people's books that don't need selling, because he sold out immediately. So in terms of Alan Scott, speaking of books that should sell out, I mean, I was, Green Lantern wasn't my number one thing growing up, but when I was a kid, I knew, it's one of those funny things. I think a lot of kids grew up, I grew up in the 80s, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity to know Alan Scott back then, but I did. I was aware of Alan Scott, and I kind of put the pieces together about there being this other Green Lantern before Hal Jordan and John Stewart. And but back then it was like, if it wasn't at the library, or if you didn't have a great comic book shop that had back issues and like really cool, or what, if there were collected editions of things, which there weren't as many of, at least not where I grew. I grew up out in the woods in Rhode Island, and I remember when a comic book store finally opened kind of near us, but like I didn't drive, so it was like nearly impossible to get there. And they didn't have a lot of stuff when they opened, so there wasn't a ton of opportunity back then. We didn't have the internet. So I kind of my exposure to Green Lantern was minimal in those days. I was a Batman kid, and then became a Superman kid when Reign of the Superman happened, which weirdly I got to adapt as a movie. But those were the first Superman comics I ever bought. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this book, obviously there have been big changes that have happened with Alan Scott in the last decade plus, certainly in the last few years. And I'm queer, and so I think it made a lot of sense to bring me in. I mean, Jeff Johns called me. We had done Flashpoint Beyond, which was the first time we ever met, and I absolutely fell in love with working with him. And you'll never hear, I don't know if you'll ever hear me say a bad word about that guy, because he's been nothing but incredibly generous and kind. And we had a great time. We had so much fun working on Flashpoint Beyond, which is not a really fun story, but we had fun. Jeremy Adams and Jeff and I. And then he was setting up this idea of the new Golden Age and this Red Lantern character, this lost character, the arch nemesis of the Golden Age Green Lantern, the Soviet answer to the Green Lantern. And he called me and he said, I think this is something, I think you should write a book. I think it should be revisiting Alan Scott's origins, but now knowing what we know about him as a closeted gay hero during that time, and introduce us to the Red Lantern. And I was kind of terrified about it. I also normally don't write, lead characters that are queer, and I hadn't done that, and I was like, do I have anything to say about it? And the more I thought about it, he said, no, you're the guy to do this. The more I thought about it, there's so much I wanted to say and so much I wanted to do, immediately Jeff's got a way of doing that, by the way. He's so good he's a great salesman. For like, as great a writer as he is, he's an incredible salesman. Like, he totally sold me on the fact that I should be writing this book right away, and I think he was right. I mean, for me, from my perspective, it's something I needed to do. I needed to write this. This is something that is a story that was brewing inside of me with pieces and parts that had been brewing for a long time, that I think I needed to get out onto the page. And I think that it makes sense. Alan Scott as a character makes sense for, as a partner for me on that journey. So I went back and started digging in on Alan Scott lore. Luckily, my story takes place mostly in 1941. So like, a lot of the big question marks that people have, huge questions about Harlequin and Jade and Obsidian, and like sort of what's going to happen in Alan Scott's life if he is, and if he was gay during, the 1940s, and since he was born. But it's kind of like that wasn't my thing. Like, he was already gay in the comics before I got here. So like, I just got to come in and start filling in and layering in what his story looks like, with the changes of having the Red Lantern back in the timeline, how that changes sort of Alan Scott's story particularly during those early days when he first meets the Red Lantern, and and kind of be as much of a caretaker as I can. I'm not in this to rewrite history and change the history of Alan Scott. I think everything happened. Everything that has happened. There's just another layer to it now. There's just another thing about the guy that we understand. And I think it's an exciting layer to explore during that time period. you know, for this guy, the greatest hero in the world at that moment, you know, to be living this with this secret, and having that influence his actions and what he does, because the secret is that he's a criminal. Based on the laws of the day, he's a criminal in his own bedroom. And so he's really conflicted about, they just formed the JSA, and he feels like, should I keep my distance from them? He thinks he should, because he's, as far as he's concerned, he could bring them down by being there, by being a part of it. And he's going to need to figure that out. And that's part of what this journey is. That's part of what this story is, a big part. So in terms of specific stuff, this story, and this is great because this is what I went to, and this is what readers should go to if you're interested and if you're enjoying the book. Just go back to the beginning. And happily, DC put out, on the day that Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, our book, number 1 came out, they also put out a facsimile edition of All American Comics number 16, which was in 1940, the origin issue of Alan Scott's Green Lantern. So that's on shelves, and people should pick it up and read it and see kind of how it all started, because this whole story grows right out of his original origins. You know, for so many people that are out there, you see them, I'm sure, online shouting about retcons and changing everything. And no, I mean, I got to tell you, you've never had a better partner than me in terms of going back to the origins of this character and staying as true as I can to those origins, to set him up to be able to have the same life that we all know he had, but just give it a little bit more color, give it a little more shading and a little more depth, which, you know, in the golden age, those books were pretty flat. Like you didn't get a lot of character development. You had the stories were very similar, and the characters all very much the same. Their voices were all very much the same. But, you know, we've gone back over the decades and we've seen them in this time period, and they're richer characters. They have more life to them. And this is just another way of exploring all that other life that they have. So read All American 16, read Secret Origins 18, which replays Alan Scott's origin story. And you know, that's, you know, if you don't want to get too far into the, you know, the Golden Age adventures, you can just stop there and just pick up our book. But I think you'll end up wanting to go back and read, you know, get your hands on as many of those Golden Age stuff. There's a compilation back there behind me, a couple of them. You'll want to get your hands on those too. So if you can find them.
No, that's awesome. And sort of like what you're talking about, framing sort of Alan's life, to me at least, like, you know, you bring up Jeff, like, hey, you know, to me, my favorite Jeff, like Green Lantern, is obviously Hal and John, because of that run, and also the power set. You know what I mean? It's hard to go back to the old Green Lantern when you have these space cops. So how do you make them interesting? And I think a lot of people, for some weird reason, kind of try to keep litigating the fact that Alan is gay. It's like, this has been done for, like, at this point, 15, 20 years. Yeah. And like you, to me, like Alan Scott, when he was introduced to me, he was gay from the beginning. So, you know, like there was never a period in my life where he wasn't, you know, in terms of my awareness of him.
That's a really cool, actually. Don't you think that there are way more interesting questions to attack and to answer, like with Alan Scott? Like you just mentioned about the powers and stuff. Like Alan Scott's powers as the Green Lantern are very different than what Hal Jordan, you know, has, and what the Green Lantern Corps has, at least in the very beginning. In the very beginning, when you go back and you read those origin stories, you know, he does things very differently. One of the big things he does, which is great, is he walks through walls.
Yeah. Which is like, what?
Which they kind of, I think, try to explain as, you know, because he like becomes light. But I'm like, light doesn't go through walls. Like, I don't understand. But so to be honest, like because I love these, and they, by the way, they refer to it as moving through the fourth dimension, which has a whole other connotation nowadays for us when we think about the fourth dimension. So that's the stuff that gets me. Listen, I'm a gay man who's excited to get to tell a really personal story about a gay hero in a time when he couldn't be openly gay. But more than that, I'm a nerd who's excited to kind of play with the pieces of explaining why, figuring out why his powers are so different. And does it make sense? And can it make sense in the canon? And I think we've come up with some cool stuff that is going to, delight and entertain you. And hopefully, it'll stand the test of time in terms of, those explanations and those things that we've come up with. We'll see.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to.
Yeah, go ahead, Troy. We're both excited.
This is the problem about how, like, we have so many people on the podcast. We're like, oh, we both want to talk and ask a question.
I know. And then the problem is I talk for 30 minutes on one answer.
But we love that. We love that. And the nice thing is I get to edit these small things out sometimes. So it's crazy that, like, I know you said you grew up like as a Batman kid, and then you're like went into Superman. I got really into comics, ironically, or whatever, through Green Lantern. And I got really into
Jeff's
I got really into Jeff Johns Green Lantern, and it's really interesting to see how Hal Jordan's my favorite Lantern, and then it was John Stewart, and then it was Guy Gardner, and then it was Kyle Rayner, and now it's like almost a really nice complete circle to be like, all right, now I'm really interested to see how Alan Scott is going to become my next favorite Green Lantern. And I love how you kind of maybe did a spoiler earlier and said, oh, there's going to be a Red Lantern in upcoming issues. And so I was curious, what's it like to see these previous elements from other Green Lantern comics, some of them that Jeff has introduced, and kind of carry that story on with not new characters that have been around for quite a while, but like get to tell, you're telling a different perspective, filling in those layers, but not only for Alan Scott and who he is as a person, but also there's going to be some new elements of lore that you're kind of spearheading going forward. So what's that kind of like?
By the way, there's one piece of like lore, like explaining that I didn't sell. I didn't get it in. I brought it to my editor and we went back and forth on it. To be honest, we actually fought about it, and I really wanted to do it, but I think he was right in the end to say we shouldn't do it. So, but someday I'll tell you what the dumb idea I had was, but I can't tell you now. What is it like? I mean, it's just like that. Like, you see the delight on my face when I'm even thinking about it, right? I'm a DC kid, and so this lore and mythology is part of my DNA, like it is yours. And so to get to play in that sandbox, but then also add something to it, or explain something that hasn't been explained, it is the greatest feeling in the world. It's almost like this. I know things get retconned and changed and what have you, but it doesn't change the fact that when you do it and when you're working in that sandbox and that world, it feels like a little taste of immortality. You feel like, ooh, I'm going to get this in there, and that's going to be a thing. Like when I did Titans Academy, I created a whole bunch of characters for that book. And I was so excited to have these new kids that could be this sort of promise for this new generation of sidekicks and, kids that could be out there. And one of them in particular really kind of sunk in and took off with fans. And, now I feel like that Stitch is the character I'm talking about. And this character Stitch, I feel like is my kid. And so Josh Williamson had some of my characters in Dark Crisis, and it's like, oh, I get worried when my kids are out there in the world now, but there's nothing like feeling like you're part of that great tapestry that you're getting to add to the lore or help make connections in the lore that you never made before. By the way, that's what Jeff has made, has done better than anybody, is to go back to stuff that people didn't question, things that maybe didn't true up together, stuff that didn't quite make sense. And instead of, I mean, sometimes there's a crisis involved, but even when there's not a crisis involved, to try to make an explanation, to try to make it make sense, take his headcanon that he had when he was a kid, trying to figure out these things with the Golden Age characters or whoever else, and then bring it into the canon. I bet he feels the same way that I feel when I'm getting to do that. Yeah, it's just, there's nothing like it. It's the coolest thing. I am a toy person, and I just get to play with these toys all the time, and it's the greatest thing in the world.
Awesome. And for you, now that there's kind of a series of different books set in this new golden age, how connected are you guys in terms of talking back and forth? I do really like how each book kind of really taps into each character. Like, Rob's book talks about, Wesley being a pacifist, which is a really interesting thing as someone that is around during the war. Flash is very much a family book, which was like Jeremy's Flash one, and your book kind of taps into something different. But like it does feel like there's a through line.
Mine's the really, dark one, full of pathos and lots of. That's in the beginning. That's the start.
Yeah.
Because remember, it's about a man coming out of the darkness into the light, and so we have to start in the darkness. And there was a lot of darkness back then for a guy like Alan. We got together at the beginning of this process and had a summit, and it was Jeremy and Rob and me, Jeff, Andrew Marino, our editor on all these books, and our group editor Katie Kubert, and Marquise Draper, our associate editor. And we just all pitched each other our stories, and kind of started thinking of how they work together, or maybe don't work together, like in terms of like they don't have to work together, like they're sort of independent of each other. And it was then that I kind of, like, I was originally going to, the time period for me was going to be, my initial pitch was pre-JSA. And I think it was out of that summit that everybody kind of decided that it made more sense to put, I say everybody, I think Andrew was the one who figured it out. It was like, I think it makes more sense if we set your thing right after the formation of the JSA, which was kind of cool because that opened up a whole new storytelling possibility for me, because it means that, like what I was saying earlier about Alan feeling like he shouldn't be a part of this team, and so he's got to come to terms with that and figure that out. That was something I didn't afford myself when I was trying to set it before the formation of the JSA. Anyway, that's what's great about those summits, and what's great about all getting to work together. But mostly what came out of that summit was I was listening to Rob Venditti tell his whole story for Sandman, and I was just like, oh man, like that's obviously going to be the best book. Like, it's so good. And of course Jeremy is, he's so, I mean, first of all, everybody trusts that Jeremy is going to get the Flash right, whether it's Jay Garrick, Wally West, or whoever. Especially if it's a family book. Jeremy is himself a family man, and so that's where that all comes from. It comes from a really honest place. So getting to hear him talk about his book in those terms was great. They got to hear me talking about the darkness. I feel like people are going to start writing articles about Alan Scott in 1941 being like he's kind of like gay Batman, I guess. It's so dark in the beginning of this story, but don't worry, it's Green Lantern. There's always going to be light.
No, that's awesome. And you talk about the darkness, like that last page was really, really powerful,
so
and
dark.
something I had to kind of go back to a couple times. Like I had to, I'm like, wait, am I reading this the right page? So
listen, buckle up, because that I grew up in the theater, actually. And one of the things that I learned in the theater was you have to have a strong act break. When you get to the end of your first act, you've got to give people an idea of what is coming after the intermission, and give them a reason to come back after the intermission, because in the theater they can just leave, so, and people can just not buy issue 2, right? So it's very similar in that way. So I knew what issue 2 was going to be, and we tease it right there on that last splash page. But keep in mind, like, I'm a big fan of the double entendre, and I think, I mean, we're not spoiling anything. It's, the last page is Alan in Arkham Asylum being held down, a bit put in his mouth. He's about to undergo electroconvulsive therapy or a form of that in 1936 or 37. And it's horrific. Like Kian Tormey, the way he realized that image on the page is horrific. And it comes out of a bunch of horrific stuff that just happened in the last few pages, and it lands there. And I think I think it came out, and it seems like it worked with you. It's compelling, and it makes you dread in a lot of ways what's going to come next. I got asked this question yesterday. Somebody said, "Is he going to be okay?" and my answer is, of course he is. Of course he is. He has to be okay. He's the Green Lantern, and he's a hero. And this story, while, like I said, it starts out in some dark places, I just am a firm believer in the idea that superheroes exist and people like Alan exist to help lead us out of the darkness. That's why he's literally a beacon of light. And so the only way he can do that is by going through that himself. So that is that tease going into issue 2, but buckle up, because issue 2 is some serious stuff. It's called Conversion. Obviously there's an allusion there to, modern day conversion therapy. Conversion therapy back in those days was even more horrific than it is now. But it's also an issue that takes place in and around Alan's origin as the Green Lantern, his conversion into this new persona, this new identity. So those things are sort of inextricably now linked in this book. And there is just, there's a lot of weight to, the what it is that brings him there. There always was, but now there's just another layer to understand how and why he becomes the Green Lantern. There's still a lot of mystery to it, though. Like we don't tell you everything yet, and but that's why it's really good to read All American 16 or Secret Origins 18 or both, because if you have a solid foundation of kind of like how his origin has always played out in the comics, I think it helps support our issue 2, because I don't feed you everything. There are things that happen in between panels and in between pages that if you know the story, you can fill in for yourself. But if you don't know the story, hopefully you'll still enjoy it and stick around, and more will be revealed as the story goes on. But yeah,
I can't wait for the second issue, because, and I love how you just described it, because it is a dark last page, but the whole rest of the comic, everything happened before it. He seems extremely confident, and that's what's really made me feel like, yeah, this guy is very much the Green Lantern that all the other Green Lanterns are, because they're all about their willpower and their confidence and what needs to get done. And that's everything that Alan has been up until this last page, where I'm like, ooh, this definitely, his confidence is taken away. He's in a tight spot, it seems like.
Keep in mind, this might be I saw somebody else get this. They didn't quite follow the time jump there, but keep in mind that last page is still before his becoming the Green Lantern. So there's two time periods, right? There's 1936 when he's in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He's on this Project Crimson with his lover, Johnny Ladd. And then we also are showing 1941 when he is the Green Lantern, and suddenly this murder mystery pops up and it connects to him and his past. But that last splash page is back in 1936, and so he was less confident then. There is, there a lot of stuff had happened. He had just, spoiler alert, he had just lost Johnny Ladd, who was kind of his compass. He was making plans about what he was going to do with the rest of his life. He saw the army and the project as a way of getting getting to write some books and retire to a house up in the middle of nowhere with Johnny, and then all that gets taken away from him, and his only connection to his identity as a gay man is his relationship with Johnny, and that's gone. And so the last page, you see him. He's ended up in Arkham Asylum, and he's undergoing some horrific therapy, as they would call it. But I will say this: I haven't told anybody this, but anybody who's read issue 2, will know. Alan checked himself into Arkham. So, which is a painful thing to think about, and it's something he has to that's part of his journey, and he's got to figure it out. But he checked himself in.
Yeah,
I can't wait for issue 2.
Yeah, I can't wait to see how he, becomes the Green Lantern that we see in the first part of it. And it definitely seems like it's going to be a tough journey, and one that we're very grateful that you're writing, and you're able to share the story that you have in mind with this character. So if you haven't read it yet, go check out Alan Scott Green Lantern. Tim has been a very gracious guest and has told us so much about it. So if you haven't read it yet, go read it, listen to this episode, and you're like, wow, I didn't know all these different things. But thank you, Tim. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for coming on. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.
Bada boom.
Thank you for listening to the Badaboom podcast. Keep the conversation going on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Get in the comments on our YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like to hear next. And please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen.